The David Strain Diaries, 1920 to 1943.
Imagine probing into the affairs of a confirmed bachelor, finding the skeleton of a lean love story dead for many years, bringing it forth and showing it to the gossiping public with all the pride of an African explorer who has shot a lion with the latest German howitzer.
David Strain, 27th of April, 1921. Context. David Harbison Strain was born in 1896 in County Down. His father, a linen merchant, was a strict and often bad-tempered Presbyterian and an authority figure in their rural church community of Knockbracken. David was educated at the elite Royal Belfast Academical Institution, but instead of going up to university, he joined the family firm based in central Belfast. The Strain family had moved to upmarket Galwally Park, located on the city's expanding southern edge in David's youth. Other Strain sons married and moved out, but number 5 remained his home until he moved with his widowed mother back into the country in the late 1930s. David was a daily diary writer and barely missed an entry between 1920 and 1943. When he died of a stroke in 1969, these diaries, well over 1 million words, were deposited in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, along with his photo albums, newspaper scrapbooks and letters. The diaries were catalogued briefly, without a hint of the rich and exceptionally rare material they contain, and so have remained virtually unknown to the world. As a diarist, David Strain was fastidious about recording not just his own feelings and thoughts about homosexuality, but also the many conversations he had with other gay men. The survival of these diaries thus gives a remarkable window onto a queer world that would otherwise be almost entirely invisible, limited to the sparse criminal records of men who were arrested for having sex in public. We might have expected to find an intensely difficult and ultimately failed life, racked with guilt and shame, but that is not the picture that David paints. Instead, the arc of his diaries depicts a journey of discovery, from isolation and ignorance to a vibrant queer world of sexual desire, love and community. Isolation and ignorance. The opening years of the diary, when David was in his mid-20s to early 30s, are fairly mundane. They describe attending church or organ recitals with his mother, travelling out to the old family farm, horse riding, or driving around the Northern Irish countryside in his beloved Triumph car. Even then, in among the long and often repetitive entries, there are hints that he was longing for a different life. David often toyed with the idea of trying to court women, but he understood that he was more drawn towards men. One of the earliest experiences David had of trying to understand and express his desires came from his close friendship with Wallace Bamford, a dairy farmer's son, who was about 5 years his junior. At first, the friendship developed well, with frequent drives together and Sunday evening visits at David's family home. In September 1927, David was optimistic.
I am inclined to think he has the same feelings as I have in regards to friendship between men. I don't know just as yet whether he has the same love for me as I have for him. He may have someone else in mind. But there is no doubt he is treading his way along the same path as I am on.
When the friendship ultimately faltered, after it became clear that Wallace was not of the same mind, David could barely hide his despair.
Wallace Bamford did not turn up. Needless to say, I was exceedingly disappointed. After impressing on him last Sunday night to be sure and come tonight. He surely must have known when he saw me on my way to Knockbracken. It would have been quite an easy thing for him to have stopped the car and told me he would not be up. Well, just shows he is not better than any other. And almost proves the saying, some friendships which we make sacrifices to preserve are not worth having. Sacrifices? What sacrifices have I made? Why, my run to Craigavon with him on this day a fortnight ago was really only undertaken after a very great mental struggle with my conscience. I accompanied him in his motor car against all my principles for Sabbath day observance, so as not to hurt him in a way, and as he might have then thought it was merely that I would not go with him. Perhaps I expect too much. A silk purse from a sow's ear. It's at times like this that I feel so absolutely forsaken. Nobody seems to care for me, further than an everyday common or garden acquaintance. None one can put a real trust in. Absolutely sure that you have their utmost sympathy. No matter where you turn, it is the same. It makes me feel it is life worth living.
Other attempts at finding a special companion continued in the late 1920s and are described in bleak depth in his diaries. But David was ultimately disappointed and tortured by jealousy when these young men found girlfriends and left his company. He didn't have the language to describe who he was or what he wanted, and could only rely on suggestive passages in old novels or poetry about close but ultimately chaste male friendship. For now, David Strange's experiences confirmed what most have assumed about life before the gay rights movement: isolation, ignorance, and despair. But even in provincial Belfast, there was an alternative world, one that existed only just out of plain sight. The turning point in David Strange's life came in June 1931, when he stumbled across the left-wing progressive bookshop in Belfast's city centre. After spotting some pamphlets in the window about the tragic life of Oscar Wilde, David made his way inside. Digging deeper into these pamphlets, a whole new world opened up before him.
Business as usual. Whilst I'd on tour around town for the Varnish Company, I came across the Progressive Bookshop in Union Street. I saw one or two little 3-inch blue books in the window. Some of the titles related to Oscar Wilde. So I went in and asked to see them. I got 3. 1, The Harlot's House and Other Poems. 2, The Tragic Story of Oscar Wilde's Life. And 3, Recollections of Oscar Wilde. 2 and 3 made marvellous reading, positively amazing. I can now understand myself better than ever. Evidently, my love for my own sex is not at all an unnatural thing. There is a passage on page 30 of number 3 which refers to shameless kissing of stable boys, etc. And on the other side of the fence, how Wilde entertained as the proud and dignified friend of fine and simple ladies. I like myself, only I have been able to control and not give an expression to my desires. In explaining, or perhaps excusing, Wilde's conduct, the author of this little booklet, Charles L. Finger, says that Wilde was only following the ways of the early Dorian Greeks who had boy lovers. Well, he also refers to Tennyson's In Memoriam as a work of a homosexualist. Also, Sir Thomas Browne of Religio Medici, who loved his man friend to the exclusion of all women. Quite a wonderful thing to me, to learn that my interpretation of Shakespeare's sonnets, Tennyson's In Memoriam, and Wilde's various poems should be exactly correct. Even to that verse in The Burden of Itis, which commences, "Who is not boy or girl and yet is both?" I also understand absolutely the undercurrent of thought expressed in Hellas. No wonder I find such delight and pleasure, although mixed with pain, in the three poems I have mentioned. Or perhaps I should say the collection of verse, and in Shakespeare's sonnets, In Memoriam, and most of Wilde's poems. What a revelation.
The next day David went back and bought another pamphlet, published recently in the USA, that was even franker.
Got blue booklet number 692, Homosexual Life. I was greatly surprised on reading it to learn that in some instances, the homosexualist or Uranian as a lover is considered purer than the natural lover. This is exactly what I told Andy Brown when he scornfully speaking of some fellow he knew as a fruit merchant. I told him that leaving out the lustful tendencies, man's love for man was perfect, and not at all like man's love for woman. I also said that he could not class a male prostitute in the same class as a man lover, in the same way that he could not class a female prostitute with a pure woman. This sentiment is also mentioned in the booklet. Strange that I should have these feelings for so many years, and only now, when I am near 35, learn the truth.
From then on, David made it his mission to find as much gay reading material as he could. He scoured the pages of the more liberal magazines, more liberal newspapers, for references to works about the intermediate sex, had them ordered into local Belfast bookshops, and even managed to come across gay novels in the infamous second-hand book market in Smithfield. Enlightened by new knowledge, David now became increasingly bold, even to the extent of basically outing himself to his mother. He describes one evening in 1933.
My mother was sewing in front of the fire. I mentioned that this was the anniversary of Oscar Wilde's death 30 years ago. She said she saw there was Wilde on a cricket team which was playing in Australia and wondered if it was any relation of his. Hardly, I said. You see, his family changed their name after he was sentenced to prison. What did he do? She asked, a question she has put to me very often. Well, nothing very desperate, I replied. Only he did not behave as most society would like. Therefore, they found fault with him. Was he a sodomite? She asked. Well, he was blamed for that, I said, controlling myself as best as I could. Well, he certainly was a bad man there, she said. I don't agree, I said. I would not for a minute say he was a bad man. There was never any definite charge of that against him. That book I read the other night, she said, referring to Little Victims, was a filthy book, and it made reference to that. I told your father, the kind of immoral stuff you were reading. If it had not been that Margaret was here, I would have burned it. Oh well, that would only have put me to the expense of buying another one. I have suspected for the past number of weeks that my mother knew perfectly well. Very probably asked my father what Wilde was put in jail for. Whether she and he have any idea of my outlook upon life, I cannot say. For years, I kept clear of girls, avoiding their company. And then a couple of years ago learned that after all it was no merit, but really in the eyes of our glorious civilization, a damnable thing. To love a man and hate a woman. I'm not a sodomite, but after all, if I met a fellow who would return my love, I cannot see why I should not kiss him and caress him if we wished. Oh yes, they just love one another, the dear things. and how well suited they are to one another. So say the onlookers to a regular pair of lovers. But in my case, it's fruit, pansy, queenie, sodomite, lunatic. What can I be blamed?